Hey guys, it's Miss Rader again for your lesson today. This is for Wednesday, the continuation of what we did on Monday. And does anybody out there remember what we did on Monday? I see a couple people that remember. Anybody else remember? Let's see. We are going to do lesson 2 on compare and contrast a first-hand and second-hand account of the same event or topic. Describe the differences in focus and the information provided. So we are going to talk about first-hand and second-hand account. Well, let's do a little quick review. First-hand account is an account given by someone who was at the event. They use the pronouns I and we. And a first-hand account may include opinions, emotions, feelings, and details. A second-hand account is an account given by someone who was not at the event. They use pronouns he, she, and they. And a second-hand account may include facts and information from many sources. So where do we find first-hand account information? Well, if you remember, they find them in diaries, emails, in speeches, and autobiographies. In second-hand account, we find those in textbooks, newspapers, magazines, and biographies. And if you remember the difference between autobiography and biography, it will help you know the difference between first-hand account and second-hand account. Okay, so we were talking about the difference between autobiographies and biographies, and you remember those? Autobiographies are the stories that people write about their own life, and biographies are stories about people's lives written by somebody else. So if you can know the difference between those two, then first-hand account and second-hand account is really easy to know the difference between. So we are going to read a little story about the Titanic. I know a lot of you know about the Titanic. Here's a little bit of its tragic history, as the title of the passage says. Just 4 days into its maiden voyage, the amazing Titanic met its tragic end. After several ice warnings were previously issued to the ship, the large vessel struck an iceberg on the night of April 14, 1912. Less than 3 hours later, the Titanic was at the bottom of the ocean. Oh, it's April 27th, 2020. How many years ago did that happen? It's a good math question. Over 2,000 people were aboard on its first voyage, which departed from England and traveled to the United States. This was the largest passenger ship of its time, and it is still one of the most famous ships in history. The massive ship was beautiful and talked about all over the world. However, the ship was not equipped with enough lifeboats in case disaster struck, and disaster did strike. The crew was not prepared. It took an hour after the Titanic struck the iceberg before any lifeboats were actually launched. Many boats were not filled to capacity before they were released into the ocean. For example, one lifeboat left with only 28 people on board when it could have held 64 people. This was a senseless mistake that cost even more people their lives. From the time the ship hit the iceberg, the passengers had less than 3 hours to figure out how to survive. Many passengers in the lower decks were unable to make it to the top decks. There was a panic as the freezing water of the Atlantic Ocean entered the ship and began pulling it to the bottom of the ocean. If the Titanic had been more prepared with lifeboats and procedures for disaster, more lives would have been saved. About 60% of the passengers and crew on board the Titanic died that tragic day out at sea. So, I can gather this is information about the Titanic, and I would gather that this would be secondhand account because the person who wrote this probably is too young to have been there in 1912, and they didn't actually go on the Titanic, and they weren't actually a survivor to write this. I believe this was written secondhand account. So, How would the text be different if it had been told from a survivor's point of view rather than this author's point of view? So how would it be different if it was told in the first-hand account? If that would have been a survivor that wrote that story? Well, I think the text would be different if the survivor had told the story. The survivor would have given us details to what was going on during the sinking of the ship. You would hear evidence in the story about the things, how people were frantically running to get to safety, were trying to run to those lifeboats that were supposed to have helped them. So I think there would have been a different way that I felt if I would have read that from somebody's point of view, as if they were the ones that were actually on the ship. It's sad that it happened, but that's from a secondhand account. I think it would be even more tragic if I would have read that from a person who may have survived that sinking of the Titanic. I think it would be something that would be with me more and would have a lasting more effect to me if I had read a first account of the Titanic. How do you feel about the Titanic, and how does your viewpoint compare to the author's viewpoint? So I've already shared some things, my opinion about the Titanic. I think was something that was great to learn about. I mean, it was the first ship that was going to go from the United States to England. And so what I wrote was, I feel the sinking of the Titanic was a very sad moment in history. And I feel like when the author said there should have been enough lifeboats on the ship. So my viewpoint is along with what the author wrote, that if they would have had more lifeboats and had maybe a disaster plan and had gone over with the passengers, this is what happens if the ship sinks, this is what we do. And if you've ever been on a cruise before, and some of you have, if you remember, they take you on a tour of the ship to show you where these lifeboats are and the life preservers and those big circle donut things, and if somebody falls overboard. So I don't think at that time that was one of the first times that people had ever been on a ship. I don't think they had those things in place. Now that in this day and time, when you do go on a cruise ship, they have these things that they tell the passengers, and to make sure that you know about, if the boat sinks, what you should do. So my viewpoint would be with the author. Like, if they would have had enough lifeboats, there would have been more survivors. So if you saw what I did right there, I talked my way through the questions, and that's what you do as a reader. You may not physically talk out loud like I just did, but all of that is going on in your mind. And as you read, you are developing point of views and similar things to what I just did. So you might consider doing that the next time that you're reading as well. Okay, let's see where we're at here. So I'm going to let you try. Explorer Wayne Brown says, I traveled on foot for a whole day to find my way to the Florida swamps, known for their many alligators. I hid behind the brush around the swamp and quietly videotaped the alligators enjoying their morning swim. Suddenly, I heard something quietly rustling through the bushes. I turned around. Okay. So we saw that part of the explorer. Now let's see the other part. The National Geographic magazine stated, Florida is home to many marshes, wetlands, rivers, lakes, and swamps. All of these are places that alligators like to make their home. Recently, Wayne Brown explored a Florida marsh to videotape the alligators' activity. He had to be careful because generally alligators are timid towards humans. However, if you approach them, they can attack. Okay, so do you see the difference now between first-hand account? This explorer, Wayne Brown, he actually is talking about when he traveled to Florida. This is from National Geographic Kids that's talking about his visit to Florida. Which one did you like more? I personally like the first-hand account. So can you tell the similarities versus the differences? So the similarities could be that in both of these, he went to Florida. Both of those say that Florida, because you see Florida here with the Florida Gators is what I kind of thought of. And here is Florida, okay? So Explorer Wayne Brown says, I traveled on foot for a whole day to find my way to the swamp. Okay, so that's first-hand account. National Geographic magazine stated, Florida is home to many marshes, wetlands, rivers, lakes, and swamps. Okay, do you see the difference? The similarities, they're both in, we're talking about similarities now. And the differences, you can also see those as well. Suddenly, I heard something quietly rustling through the bushes. I turned around, and the alligator that was behind me started running away. What a close call. Now, that's first count. Now, look over here. He had to be careful because generally alligators are timid towards humans. However, if you approach them, they can attack. More exciting over here, right? Yes. So you can tell the differences and the similarities of both of these from first-hand account, second-hand account. Now, having both of those, I can write a paragraph. The first-hand and second-hand accounts are similar because both accounts explain that Wayne Brown went to a swamp to videotape alligators. The accounts are different, however, because the first-hand account focuses more on his personal experience of what happened when he went to videotape the alligators. The first-hand account shows that when he encountered the alligator, he seemed scared. The second-hand account is different because the focus is more on facts about what the landscape of Florida is like, as well as what can happen if you get too close to an alligator. So, all of that being said, that is how you tell the difference, compare, and contrast the similarities and differences between first-hand account and second-hand account. So when you do your work tomorrow and you get ready to take your quiz on Friday, just keep in mind how point of view is also along the same lines as first-hand account and second-hand account. Okay, if you have any questions, you feel free to rewatch the video. You can send me a message on Google Classroom. I will answer anything that you ask. So I will talk to you later, and I will see you next week. See ya.